My name is Paula, and I am 32 years old living in Denver, where my birthday celebration unexpectedly turned into a horrific crime scene. My estranged older sister arrived uninvited carrying a decadent chocolate cake while wearing a smile that felt incredibly unsettling after years of conflict. She persistently shoved the plate toward me with an intensity that I should have recognized as a warning sign, insisting that I take the first bite immediately to accept her blessing. I set the dessert aside because I was too occupied with greeting other guests to eat right then. My 8-year-old son Toby was extremely hungry from running around, so he quietly sliced a large piece for himself, while I had my back turned to the table. The terrifying sound of a metal fork hitting the floor made me turn around to see my son standing rigid with fear. His voice shook uncontrollably as he looked at me and whispered, "Mom, there's something in the cake. It tastes very strange." He instantly collapsed to the floor and his small body began convulsing violently while the festive atmosphere shattered into screams of panic. Paramedics loaded my unconscious child into the back of an ambulance as the sirens pierced through the cold night air. I watched in horror as the emergency vehicle sped away, but the nightmare was far from over. Just 10 minutes later, two police cars rushed down the street and screeched to a halt directly in front of my sister's house. If you want to discover the dark truth behind this family tragedy, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to support us. In the hospital hallway reeking of antiseptic, the doctor stepped out with a grim expression that made my heart feel like it stopped beating entirely. He approached me slowly while holding a clipboard filled with terrifying medical data, then removed his surgical mask to deliver the diagnosis that would change our lives forever. The toxicology report confirmed that Toby had ingested a substantial amount of a highly corrosive industrial chemical, which is typically found in heavy-duty drain cleaners. The only silver lining in this nightmare was that he stopped eating immediately after tasting the bitterness, so the dosage was not high enough to be instantly fatal. However, the toxins were currently ravaging his small kidneys and causing severe chemical burns throughout his esophagus, which meant he required immediate dialysis to filter his blood. Hearing those devastating words caused my legs to give out beneath me, because I could not fathom how such a deadly substance ended up inside a birthday cake. The doctor assured me that they were doing everything possible to stabilize him, but the image of Toby convulsing on the floor kept replaying in my mind like a torture device. While I was trying to process this horrific information, the regional sheriff approached me to explain why his deputies had surrounded the house across town so quickly. He informed me that a vigilant neighbor living next to Sabrina had called 911 after witnessing suspicious activity in her backyard immediately following her return from my party. The witness described seeing a woman frantically throwing plastic bottles and rubber gloves into an outdoor fireplace in the middle of a snowstorm, which seemed incredibly unusual. This report prompted the police to storm the property on suspicion of destroying evidence related to the medical emergency that had just occurred at my house. The sheriff spoke in a low and serious tone as he detailed how they found partially melted plastic fragments in the ashes that matched containers for toxic industrial cleaning agents. It seemed that my sister had attempted to incinerate the tools she used to commit this crime before anyone could connect them to the cake. The authorities brought my sister Sabrina into the station for questioning, but she apparently put on a performance worthy of an Academy Award to deflect their accusations. She sobbed uncontrollably while claiming that she was merely burning some old garden waste and dead leaves before the weather worsened, completely denying any knowledge of chemical bottles. Regarding the chocolate cake, she vehemently insisted that she purchased it from a high-end bakery downtown and had absolutely no idea how it became contaminated with poison. She shouted at the investigators that she loved her nephew more than anything in the world and would never do anything to harm a single hair on his head. Her ability to lie with such conviction terrified me because I knew the history of her jealousy and our strained relationship better than anyone else. She was painting herself as a victim of circumstance who was being unfairly targeted simply because she brought the dessert. The sheriff sighed heavily as he delivered the news that made my blood boil with righteous indignation and disbelief. Since the bottles were mostly destroyed by fire and they found no direct fingerprints connecting her to the poison inside the cake itself, they could not hold her indefinitely. The district attorney felt the evidence was too circumstantial to charge her with attempted murder without more concrete proof of intent or possession. They had to release her pending further investigation, meaning the woman who poisoned my child was walking free while he lay hooked up to machines fighting for his life. I sat on the uncomfortable plastic chair in the waiting room while a cold realization washed over me like a bucket of ice water. I thought back to the moment she handed me the plate, remembering the intense and predatory look in her eyes as she demanded I eat it. That cake was never intended for a hungry 8-year-old boy who simply wanted a sweet treat during a celebration. The poison was meant for me, and if I had eaten that large slice as she insisted, my adult body would have absorbed a lethal dose before anyone realized what was happening. Toby was fighting for his life right now simply because he stepped in front of a bullet that Sabrina had aimed directly at my heart. The guilt of that realization almost crushed me, but it was quickly replaced by a fierce determination to protect what was left of my family. I pulled my phone out of my pocket with trembling hands to dial the number of my lawyer, Mr. Henderson. I told him to get out of bed immediately because I needed him to file an emergency restraining order against Sabrina before the sun came up. I swore to him that I would not let that monster anywhere near this hospital to finish what she started, no matter what it cost me. The next morning, as the snow in Denver was still falling heavily and covering the roads in white, I decided to go find my sister's real motive myself. I left Toby under the watchful care of the nursing staff and drove my car slowly through the dangerous slush to a secluded coffee shop on the edge of town. I had arranged a secret meeting with Sabrina's ex-boyfriend Mark, hoping that he could provide some insight into her erratic behavior leading up to the party. Mark was already sitting in a back booth when I arrived, looking incredibly disheveled with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he had not slept in days. I ordered a black coffee and sat down across from him, demanding to know everything he knew about Sabrina's recent financial situation. He hesitated for a long moment before looking around the empty cafe to ensure no one was listening to our conversation. Mark unlocked his phone with trembling fingers and slid it across the table so I could read a series of terrifying text messages. The screen was filled with aggressive threats from unsaved numbers demanding immediate payment for massive debts incurred at an underground casino. I scrolled through the messages and felt sick as I read graphic descriptions of what would happen to her if the money did not appear. Mark leaned across the table and whispered in a voice thick with fear to explain the gravity of the situation. He told me that Sabrina had fallen deep into a gambling addiction and owed a dangerous group of loan sharks nearly $250,000. I looked at him in disbelief and asked how she possibly thought she could repay such an astronomical sum without a job. He shook his head and delivered the sentence that made the timeline of the poisoning click into place. Sabrina is desperate, Paula. Those loan sharks said they would break her legs if she didn't pay by Sunday. My blood ran cold because today was already Saturday, meaning she had less than 24 hours to come up with the money or face brutal consequences. I thanked him for his honesty and left the cafe with a heavy heart to investigate the second part of my suspicion. I drove back to my house and went straight to the heavy steel safe hidden behind a painting in my study to retrieve the estate documents Mom and Dad had left behind. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I pulled out the thick leather binder containing the details of the family trust fund. The assets were currently valued at $3.5 million of fortune that our parents had worked their lives to build. I scanned through the dense legal paragraphs until my finger stopped on a specific clause regarding the line of succession for the executor. The text clearly stated that I was the sole trustee, but it also contained a provision for what would happen in the event of my untimely death. I needed to be absolutely certain about the legal interpretation of this clause before I took my next step. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number of Mr. Henderson, who answered immediately despite it being the weekend. I read the specific paragraph aloud to him and asked if the control of the funds would transfer immediately without probate. If you had died from a stroke yesterday, Sabrina would be the sole legal heir right now. The phone almost slipped from my hand as the final piece of this horrific puzzle clicked into place with devastating clarity. Sabrina did not just want to hurt me out of jealousy. She needed to eliminate me before tomorrow to save her own skin. The industrial poison in the cake was supposed to look like a sudden medical emergency that would kill me just in time for her to claim the money. She planned to use my death to access the $3.5 million and pay off the loan sharks before Sunday ended. I sat alone in my study while the realization that my own sister viewed my life as nothing more than a transaction to clear her gambling debts washed over me. She was not just a jealous sibling anymore. She was a desperate predator who would stop at nothing to get what she needed by tomorrow. I wiped the tears from my face and decided right then that I would not let her get away with this attempted murder. That afternoon, Sabrina proactively contacted me, her voice over the phone sounding desperate but still trying to appear calm to hide her guilt. She suggested we meet immediately to discuss a family matter that could not be explained over the telephone, begging me to see her one last time before she did something drastic. I agreed to meet her at a secluded bench in Washington Park because the restraining order Mr. Henderson filed prevented her from coming anywhere near the hospital grounds where Toby was recovering. The weather in Denver was unforgivingly cold as I parked my car and walked toward the designated meeting spot, tightening my scarf against the biting wind that whipped snow across the empty fields. I saw Sabrina sitting alone on a frozen bench, huddled inside a thin coat that looked insufficient for the weather, her eyes darting nervously around the empty park as if she expected someone to jump out from behind the trees. When she saw me approaching, she immediately stood up and wiped away what looked like genuine tears, composing herself into the image of a repentant sibling seeking forgiveness. We sat with a significant distance between us on the wooden bench while she launched into a rehearsed speech about how much she regretted our estrangement over the years. She claimed that the incident with the cake had been a terrible wake-up call for her, although she still maintained the lie that she had nothing to do with the poison itself. She told me that she wanted to turn her life around and leave her past mistakes behind, painting a vivid picture of a future where we were close sisters again. Then she finally arrived at the true purpose of this urgent meeting, presenting a business plan to open a high-end fashion boutique in the city center. She explained that she had found a perfect location and suppliers, but she needed a significant amount of capital immediately to secure the lease before someone else took it. She reached across the space between us, grabbing my gloved hands with a grip that was surprisingly strong and desperate. "Please, Paula. I just need $200,000 to start over. I promise I'll be a better sister." I looked down at her hands clutching mine and noticed they were trembling violently, a tremor that had nothing to do with the freezing temperature of the park. Her eyes kept flickering toward the expensive watch on her left wrist every few seconds, checking the passing time with an obsessive intensity that betrayed her inner panic. I knew exactly why she was so anxious because Mark had told me that the loan sharks gave her until Sunday to pay up or face brutal physical consequences. She was not trying to start a fashion business. She was trying to save her own legs from being broken by violent criminals. I decided to play along with her charade because I needed to trap her in a situation where she would confess everything. I forced a sympathetic smile onto my face and told her that I was willing to give her a chance because our parents would have wanted me to help her. However, I explained that withdrawing $200,000 in cash was not something I could do instantly due to bank security protocols regarding the trust fund. I told her that I needed to submit a request and wait for the clearance, which meant I could not get the physical cash into her hands until the next day. I leaned in closer and proposed that I would bring the money directly to her house on Sunday afternoon, knowing full well that Sunday was the absolute deadline the debt collectors had set for her. The color drained from her face as she realized I was pushing the exchange to the very last possible minute of her safety window. "Can't we do it tonight?" "Sunday might be too late." Her voice cracked with genuine terror as she pleaded with me to speed up the process, her facade of the calm businesswoman completely crumbling for a second. I shook my head firmly and lied that the bank was already closed for the weekend, making a Sunday withdrawal a special favor I had to call in personally. I told her it was either Sunday at her house, or I would not be able to give her the money at all, because I refused to do an electronic transfer for such a large sum. Sabrina looked like a trapped animal, her eyes wide with fear, as she mentally calculated if she could survive until then. She eventually nodded her head in defeat, because she realized she had absolutely no other option but to wait and pray. I left her sitting on that cold bench and drove straight back to my house to prepare the final prop for my plan. I found an old leather suitcase in the attic and began filling the bottom of it with stacks of cut newspaper and printer paper to create volume. Then I carefully arranged a thin layer of real $100 bills on top of the paper to make it look like the entire case was filled with cash. As I packed the fake ransom, I felt a cold resolve settling in my chest, because I knew that tomorrow I would be walking into a dangerous confrontation. I was no longer the victim of her poisoning plot. I was the one setting the trap. And tomorrow, Sabrina would have to answer for everything she did to my son. Sunday arrived with a heavy atmosphere as the gray sky over Denver signaled an approaching snowstorm, mirroring the turbulent events that were about to unfold inside Sabrina's home. I parked my car a block away to avoid drawing attention and walked the rest of the distance with the heavy leather suitcase gripping my hand like an anchor. The wind bit at my exposed face, but the cold I felt outside was nothing compared to the chill that greeted me when Sabrina finally unlocked her front door. The interior of her house was freezing because she had likely stopped paying her utility bills weeks ago to feed her gambling addiction. The living room was in a state of chaotic disarray, with piles of dirty laundry and takeout boxes scattered everywhere, a stark contrast to the successful image she tried to project. Heavy curtains were drawn tight and taped shut against the window frames, blocking out every sliver of natural light, as if she were hiding from the world. The air inside felt thick and suffocating, charged with a palpable tension that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Sabrina was pacing back and forth on the worn carpet like a caged animal, wearing the same clothes she had on yesterday. Her eyes immediately locked onto the suitcase in my hand, with a terrifying mixture of desperate hunger and abject fear. She did not even say hello or offer to take my coat. She just extended her trembling hands toward the luggage. She spoke with a rapid and breathless cadence, telling me that she was in a huge rush to meet her business partners and needed the capital right this second. I could smell the stale scent of fear and unwashed sweat radiating off her, confirming that the deadline Mark told me about was indeed imminent. I ignored her outstretched hands and walked past her to the center of the room, deliberately moving with a slow and calculated rhythm to test her patience. I sat down on the only armchair that wasn't covered in trash and placed the suitcase on the floor between my feet, effectively using it as a barrier. I unzipped my purse with agonizing slowness and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents that I had printed off the internet the night before. I told her that before I could hand over $200,000 of family trust money, I needed her to sign these affidavits confirming the funds would be used strictly for legitimate business purposes. I placed the papers on the coffee table and held out a pen, watching her reaction closely. Sabrina looked at the papers as if they were venomous snakes, her chest heaving with panic as she glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner. She wiped her sweaty palms on her jeans and tried to grab the suitcase handle while ignoring the pen entirely. I pulled the case back and told her firmly that not a single dollar would leave this house until every page was initialed and signed. The pressure finally caused her facade to crack completely, and she exploded in a fit of manic rage that echoed off the bare walls. She screamed at the top of her lungs with her eyes bulging wide. "Just give me the money, Paula. Stop with the paperwork." I remained seated and calm in the face of her outburst, staring at her with an intensity that finally made her freeze. I asked her quietly why she was so terrified of a little paperwork if this was truly for a fashion business. Before she could invent another lie, I shifted the conversation directly to the topic she had been avoiding since Friday night. I asked her again about the chocolate cake and why she had been so insistent that I eat the first slice. I watched the color drain from her face as I described how Toby looked when he was convulsing on the floor, emphasizing the pain he went through. I saw the guilt flash across her eyes, followed quickly by a wave of self-preservation and panic. She started stammering nonsensical excuses, claiming she didn't know what I was talking about, but her eyes kept darting to the front door as if she could hear an invisible clock ticking down her remaining seconds. The atmosphere in the room grew so heavy that it felt like the walls were closing in on us. Sabrina realized that I was stalling her intentionally, and a dangerous look of realization crossed her face. She stopped looking at the papers and fixed her gaze on the suitcase with a primal determination. She lunged forward with a sudden burst of adrenaline, her fingers clawing at the air as she tried to physically wrestle the money away from me. I braced myself to shove her back, but before our struggle could escalate into violence, a deafening sound shattered the moment. A thunderous banging erupted from the front door like a sledgehammer hitting the wood, causing the entire house to shake and freezing both of us in place. The thunderous banging on the door sounded like it wanted to shatter the wooden frame, accompanied by aggressive screaming for debt payment that made the whole house shake violently. Dust fell from the ceiling fixtures as the heavy blows continued to rain down on the front entrance, sounding less like human hands and more like metal bats or crowbars striking the wood. The terrifying voices on the other side were muffled by the walls, but their message was crystal clear, shouting Sabrina's name with a venomous intensity that promised extreme physical violence. A rough voice roared above the noise, warning her that she had exactly 5 minutes to open the door with the cash, or they would break their way inside and dismantle the house piece by piece until they found what they were owed. The realization that her deadline had physically arrived caused Sabrina to completely lose her grip on reality, her eyes widening until they were surrounded by frantic white circles of pure terror. The imminent threat of brutality stripped away the last remnants of Sabrina's composure, transforming her from a manipulative sister into a desperate creature fighting for survival. She stopped looking at the door and turned her wild gaze back to the leather suitcase sitting between us, seeing it not just as money, but as the only thing standing between her and a hospital bed or a morgue. She lunged at me with a sudden, explosive speed that caught me off guard, grabbing the handle of the suitcase with both hands and yanking it with all her strength. Her fingernails dug painfully into my wrists as we wrestled for control of the bag, her breathing coming in ragged, high-pitched gasps that sounded like sobbing. She screamed right into my face, her breath sour with fear and neglect, begging me to release the funds before the men outside broke through the lock. "Give it to me. They're going to kill me." I held onto the suitcase with an iron grip, refusing to let her take the bait without admitting to the crime she had committed against my family. The adrenaline coursing through my veins gave me the strength to shove her back, creating just enough distance to look her in the eye, while the pounding on the door grew louder and more frantic. I knew the police were listening through the wire I was wearing, but I needed her to say the words out loud to connect the poison directly to this specific moment of financial desperation. I shouted over the cacophony of the breaking door and her hysterical sobbing, demanding the truth that we both knew she was hiding. "You poisoned me for this money, didn't you? You wanted me dead to get the inheritance." My accusation seemed to snap something inside her mind, breaking the dam of secrets she had been guarding since the night of the party. In her panic-stricken state, she no longer cared about legal consequences or morality. She only cared about the angry men standing on her porch. She stopped pulling for a second and threw her hands up in a gesture of absolute madness, her face twisted into a mask of resentment and entitlement. She screamed the horrific truth at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking under the strain of her hysteria, ensuring that everyone inside and outside the house could hear her motivation. "Yes, I needed the money. If you had eaten that cake, I would have everything by now. Why didn't you just die?" The confession hung in the stale air of the living room for a split second, a chilling confirmation that my own sister had wished for my death. However, before the echo of her words had even faded, the sound of shattering glass and splintering wood exploded from the rear of the house. The police tactical team, who had been silently monitoring the situation from the backyard to cut off her escape route, kicked in the back door with tremendous force. A swarm of uniformed officers flooded into the living room, with their weapons drawn, shouting commands that drowned out the noise of the loan sharks outside. Sabrina froze in shock, her hand still hovering over the suitcase, as the reality of her situation shifted from one nightmare to another. Two officers tackled her to the ground before she could react, pulling her arms behind her back, while another team moved to the front entrance to intercept the criminals trying to break in. The cold, metallic click of handcuffs snapping around Sabrina's wrists signaled the end of her freedom, sealing her fate just moments after she had confessed to attempted murder. An officer pulled the suitcase away from the center of the room and opened it to reveal the layers of worthless paper hidden beneath the thin veneer of cash. Sabrina lifted her head from the carpet and saw the fake money, realizing that she had confessed her darkest secret for absolutely nothing. She let out a long, agonizing scream of despair that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the total collapse of her greedy ambitions. I stood silently in the corner watching the scene unfold, feeling a profound sadness as the sister I once knew was dragged away, leaving nothing behind but a broken house and a shattered family. 2 months after the shocking arrest, Sabrina's trial took place amidst community outrage and intense media attention. The courtroom in Denver was packed to capacity, with reporters and curious onlookers filling every available seat to witness the downfall of the woman who poisoned a child for money. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable sense of anger as the details of the crime had spread throughout the city, turning Sabrina into a pariah. She sat at the defendant's table looking pale and diminished, wearing a prison jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame, a stark contrast to the arrogant woman who had demanded money from me just weeks ago. Her defense attorney tried to paint a sympathetic picture, arguing that Sabrina was a victim of circumstance, who had been driven to madness by predatory lenders and crippling addiction. They claimed she never intended to kill anyone, only to cause a medical emergency that would grant her access to funds, framing her actions as desperate rather than malicious. However, the prosecution systematically dismantled these weak excuses with an avalanche of undeniable evidence that left the jury gasping in horror. The recording from the wire I wore that Sunday was played aloud, filling the silent courtroom with Sabrina's own shrill voice, admitting that she wanted me dead to secure the inheritance. The chilling clarity of her confession, screaming, "Why didn't you just die?" echoed off the walls and sealed her fate in the minds of everyone present. Mark took the stand next, testifying about the gambling debts and confirming that Sabrina had actively sought information about undetectable poisons days before the party. His testimony proved premeditation, destroying any argument that this was a spur-of-the-moment decision made under duress. The final nail in her coffin came when the doctor who saved Toby walked to the witness stand with a grim expression. He presented the toxicology reports and explained in terrifying detail what the industrial chemical would have done to an adult body if I had eaten the full slice. He looked directly at the jury and delivered a professional assessment that silenced the room completely. This was not an accident. It was a calculated attempt to end a life. His words lingered in the air, stripping away any remaining doubt about the lethal intent behind the chocolate cake. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all counts, including attempted murder in the first degree. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for family violence, wasted no time in delivering a sentence that reflected the severity of the betrayal. She banged her gavel with finality and sentenced Sabrina to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. Additionally, she issued a permanent court order stripping Sabrina of any future claim to the family trust fund, ensuring she would never see a single cent of the money she killed for. The consequences of her actions began to crumble her life immediately after the gavel fell. The bank moved swiftly to foreclose on her house to cover the outstanding debts she had hidden, leaving the property empty and abandoned. Her husband, who had been blindsided by the revelation of her secret life, filed for immediate divorce and full custody of their children. He moved them to another state to shield them from the shame of their mother's crimes, effectively erasing Sabrina from their lives. She had gambled everything on one horrific act and lost more than she could have ever imagined. Before she was transferred to a maximum security facility, I was granted a brief visitation to say my final goodbye. We sat on opposite sides of a thick glass partition, the silence between us heavier than any argument we had ever had. She looked at me with eyes that were hollow and defeated, waiting for me to scream or cry, but I had no tears left for her. I picked up the phone receiver and spoke calmly, delivering the truth that defined her tragedy. You chose money over your family. Now you have neither. I hung up the phone without waiting for a response and walked away, leaving her alone in the gray concrete room. Stepping out of the prison gates, I took a deep breath of the crisp Colorado air, feeling the weight of the past 2 months finally lifting off my shoulders. The nightmare was over. Justice had been served, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free to begin my life again. 1 year has passed since that dark day in Denver, and the heavy shadow of betrayal has finally lifted from our lives. I stood in the kitchen of our new home, packing sandwiches and fruit into a wicker basket, watching through the window as Toby ran circles around the backyard with our new golden retriever. We were preparing for a weekend picnic at a nearby national park, a simple pleasure that felt impossible just 12 months ago when I was sitting in a hospital waiting room praying for a miracle. The scenery around us has changed completely, trading the cold, gray, snowy streets of Colorado for a vibrant coastal city where the sun seems to shine a little brighter. Leaving the city where my sister tried to kill me was the hardest yet most necessary decision I ever made, but seeing the smile on my son's face today confirms that it was the right choice. Toby has completely recovered both physically and mentally from the poisoning incident that nearly took his life. The doctors were amazed at his resilience, and his kidneys healed without any long-term damage thanks to the immediate treatment he received. For a while, I worried that he would be traumatized by the memory of the birthday cake or develop a fear of food, but he has bounced back with the incredible adaptability that only children possess. He is now a happy, energetic 9-year-old boy who loves school and making new friends, completely unburdened by the dark family secrets that once threatened to destroy him. His laughter fills our home every single day, replacing the tense silence and anxiety that used to suffocate us when we lived in the shadow of Sabrina's drama. Regarding the $3.5 million trust fund that caused so much pain, I decided that I could not simply spend it on personal luxuries, knowing the blood price attached to it. Instead, I used a significant portion of the inheritance to establish a charitable foundation named after our parents. The foundation is dedicated to 2 specific causes that reflect our journey, supporting victims of domestic violence and providing rehabilitation resources for people struggling with severe gambling addiction. It felt like the only way to purify the legacy of that money was to use it to heal the very sickness that twisted my sister's mind. Every time I sign a check to help a family escape a dangerous situation or help an addict get treatment, I feel like I am honoring my parents in the way Sabrina never could. Our life now is defined by a profound sense of peace and safety that I no longer take for granted. We have built a circle of friends who value us for who we are, not for what we can give them or what they can take from us. There are no more late-night phone calls from debt collectors, no more manipulative guilt trips, and no more fear of hidden agendas at family gatherings. I have learned to forgive the past without forgetting it, allowing myself to move forward while keeping the lessons of survival close to my heart. As I called Toby to come inside and get ready for our trip, I realized that we didn't just survive the poison, we thrived in spite of it. This story serves as a stark and uncompromising warning about the destructive power of greed and unchecked gambling addiction. When the desire for money clouds human judgment, individuals can easily trample upon sacred blood ties, turning their most beloved family members into mortal enemies. We must remain constantly vigilant and alert, even with those closest to us, whenever we observe unusual signs or drastic behavioral changes. Blind trust and tolerating bad behavior can sometimes cost us our very lives or the lives of our children. The law of karma is always present and inescapable. Those who sow the wind will inevitably reap the whirlwind. My greedy sister wanted to seize everything for herself, yet in the end, she lost absolutely everything: her freedom, her family, and her dignity. Only integrity and genuine love can bring sustainable happiness. Thank you for spending your valuable time following Paula and Toby's arduous journey to find justice. Your support is the greatest motivation for us to continue sharing these stories. If you found this narrative meaningful, please share it to spread this important lesson of vigilance to everyone you know. What do you think about the 25-year sentence given to Sabrina? Please leave your comments and thoughts below.